Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February Filled with Less show.
Yes, welcome. It is cold here in Northwest Indiana, right?
It is.
Winter has settled in.
Cold and snowy, and I hear more snow's on the way.
Okay, yes. I need some positive optimism, Cynthia. Remind me how beautiful it is.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's like
it's magical.
Yes. I think when it snowed last week, when we had our 18 inches or whatever it was over the course of 2 days, I remember you saying it was like a picture postcard.
It did. I did. I actually went snowshoeing for the first time.
Oh,
and that was really fun.
Oh my gosh. I've only gone once, but really I thought I was going to die.
Yeah, it's a good workout. It's a really good workout.
It is a good workout.
Yeah.
Well, what have you been working on lately?
So, Cynthia, we had lunch this week and we were talking about the show and just kind of what we were reflecting on this month. And I had mentioned then that, I was kind of struggling this week. I feel like, this month is a real challenging month for me. And all of a sudden, I felt like I had been slammed by these tidal waves of fear.
Ooh.
So, and not my normal, like we all have our worries, our nervousness just throughout the day. These felt more oppressive or more all-consuming. And I couldn't shake them. And I was like, what is happening? They felt very debilitating to me.
Oh, interesting.
And so I, in my morning stillness, I was saying, I'm going to look to Scripture, look to the saints, to try and find more about courage or fear. And I found some really interesting things, some writings from St. Isaac the Syrian and St. John Climacus specifically that I wanted to share today because they were really helpful to me. And the one was from St. Isaac, and he said, if you wish to make a right beginning in your spiritual activity, first prepare yourself for the temptations that will befall you. For the devil has the habit of visiting with terrible temptations those whom he sees starting a righteous life with ardent faith. Therefore, prepare yourself to meet courageously the temptations that will surely assail you, and only then begin to practice them. And that was really eye-opening for me because, in our community, that's exactly what we do together, right? Yeah. We're always working together. We have our weekly chats. We have our, we each have our routines that we're working on, our deep dives, for the purpose of growing in faith together.
Right.
And to, defeat the passions, to embody the fruits of the Spirit, to cultivate inner stillness. And, we have to know that anytime we're making any kind of a concerted spiritual effort, we will meet temptations. And this was a good reminder of that. And then St. John Climacus said, if you pursue virtue, you are most likely to be attacked much by fear. Such a person should make every effort to overcome cowardice, that daughter of unbelief and the offspring of vain glory. And when I could see, like, oh my goodness, this is a spiritual attack possibly, like these waves, or these are temptations that we face. And to remember that every day we are fighting a spiritual battle.
Yes.
That is the significance of each day. And that's why we're told to prepare, to put on the full armor of God, and to go into our days, on guard, knowing these things will happen, right?
Right. Gosh, Molly, this is incredible, first of all, that you're bringing all this up and the quotes that you found, because this past week in my Bible studies and reading, I kind of was enlightened with somewhat of the same situation. I was reading In the Spirit of Happiness by the monks of New Skeet.
I like that book.
I do too. I love it. And he was talking about how the first fruit of ascesis, or spiritual discipline, is self-knowledge. And in that self-knowledge, we understand our strengths and our weaknesses, our propensities for sin or that we have the ability to, fear or worry. We get to know ourselves, and by getting to know ourselves, we can have more compassion on other people. It's like we get this ingrained sense of humanity, and it opens up our hearts to others. And it all starts with spiritual discipline, which is where you're at in those mornings when you've been finding the scripture and you've been being intentional about living out your faith. And then I was reading a quote by St. Theophan, the recluse. And he said that one of the advantages of knowing yourself and knowing what your propensities are, whether it's fear or anger or pride or anything, is that you can then gird yourself with scripture. So for our listeners and for both of us, if we know that we have a propensity towards something, go in, find scripture that pertains to that particular thing, memorize it, and then gird yourself with that in the mornings, like before your day starts. And the way he says it is that it binds you. Like, think of it as like its arms around you. That scripture that you're memorizing, the arms are around you and it's binding you, but in a freeing and comforting way, because it's binding the passions. And I just remember when I was an evangelical Protestant, it was, and you can probably relate to this, it was so big, like memorizing scripture all the time. That it was one of the main things we did as Protestants, right? And I need to go back to that.
That's so beautiful. And, in just like reflexively, that's what I went to. Like, I remember saying, like, over and over, I would just repeat, taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are they who take refuge in him. Over at night, taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are they who take refuge in him. And it's very true. It feels like that. It feels like it helps me take that journey from the mind to the head down into the heart. And this is what we learned from Father John Calbam on our Raw Foods retreat. And talking about that journey and why it's so important to remain here in the heart, because in our heads, that's where our fears are, our ego, our pride. It's loud up there, it's noisy. And to descend into the heart is where you begin to find the beauty, the mystery, the compassion for yourself and for others, and the stillness. But it's a lot of work to stay there, right?
It is.
To stay in that calm.
It is.
And I realized that, like, I have to be vigilant. I think what you said is consume scripture, uplifting podcasts, uplifting spiritual books, and avoid the things that are exasperating. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Exasperating. Is that the right word?
Or exacerbating?
Exacerbating.
Okay.
That's the word. My fears and my passions. And maybe even like, yes, I try to do my morning and evening prayers, but in times when I'm really struggling against something, and don't you find that when you get those, those temptations or those things, it's usually where you're the most vulnerable?
Absolutely.
So for me, it's always as a mother. Like, it's just, if I'm going to have fear or something like that, it's going to hit me in my softest spot, and so maybe I'll go to my icon corner 4, 5, 6 times a day, and just pray the Psalms, just gaze at Christ. But it's using all the tools, doing all the things to connect with Christ, to stay in your heart, and then you begin, like you said, to find even beauty in the tribulation.
Exactly, because you have the armor of God on you. Well, this all reminds me of how we are wanting to live in peace and simplicity, and what we're talking about is really very peaceful, and it's a simple way of just realigning our days and our fears and our, anything else that we're drawn to. And one of the things we're going to talk about today on today's show involves simplicity and has some great wisdom. So let's talk about our show today so we can jump right in. First of all, for the Peaceful Mind segment, we're bringing on doctors Jane and Dan Hinshaw. They are from Michigan, and you'll get to know them very well. They were friends and spiritual children of Father Roman Braga of blessed memory. And we're going to talk about a new book that's coming out. It's not even out yet, and you guys are going to love this interview. The second one for Healthy Body is with Petar Arsenyjevic. He's actually my own personal trainer, and we're going to talk about the importance of staying flexible and what happens if you're not flexible, and can you get that flexibility back from when you were younger? That's my big question, because I want it back. And then lastly, in our Productive Life segment, we're going to be talking about knowing when to say no. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of us. We have to be able to say no and be comfortable with it. So with that, why don't we start with the Peaceful Mind segment?
Daniel Hinshaw, MD, is Professor Emeritus of Surgery at the University of Michigan School of Medicine and consultant in palliative medicine at the University of Michigan Geriatric Center. He has taught palliative care at St. Vladimir's and to medical professionals and clergy in international settings including Ethiopia, Uganda, Serbia, Romania, and Lebanon. For several years, he has served as a visiting professor at the St. John of Damascus Theological Institute and St. George's University Hospital of the University of Balamand. He is the author of several books: Suffering and the Nature of Healing, Touch and the Healing of the World, and Neither Bond Nor Free. His wife, Jane, worked as a VA psychiatrist for 30 years and does volunteer work with Dan in Ethiopia, Lebanon, Romania, and at St. Vladimir's Seminary. They recently worked together on a biography of their spiritual father, Archimandrite Roman Braga, which is coming out soon, called Journey to Simplicity, The Life and Wisdom of Archimandrite Roman Braga.
Hello, Dr. Dan and Jane Hinshaw. Thank you so much for joining us on the Filled with Love show.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity
You're welcome. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about Father Roman. And you know what? I think the first thing that we want to go into is, how did you guys meet him? How did he come into your lives, and what led up to the book? And while you're talking, we're going to actually show a picture of the three of you together. So Jane, do you want to answer that question?
Sure, thank you. We were so blessed to have Father Roman in our lives. I think both of us consider it the biggest blessing of our lives, finding the church and finding Father Roman. We were catechumens in 1995, and after that intermittently started going to the monastery, which was so enriching, and met him. And every time after the service, sometimes he'd come out and say, "Oh, just a word." And so we were all so excited to hear his word. But it was in 2010 when this picture was taken. At that time, we were starting to work more in Romania, particularly Dan at that time, developing a course in palliative care. And so we were blessed to be able to interview him about what is suffering, and suffering in the context of Romania, and of course in his own life, where he suffered so intensively. So that was a time when we really were so blessed to connect with him on a different level. And we started visiting more. He gradually became our spiritual father and confessor until he was too ill to do that anymore. But we kept visiting. We became intermittent consultants for the monastery on various issues. And then when he became very ill in 2013, Dan was able to help set up some official hospice care for him, but also we started visiting every single week at that time so that we could check in on him after liturgy. So for 2 years, we were able to sit down with him every single Sunday after liturgy and ask him how he was doing, And invariably he would say, "I'm waiting." So it was just this amazing walk that we had with him during those last 2 years of his life. And then Dan was with him when he died. So that was an incredible blessing as well.
Goodness, yes.
Wow.
Yes.
We were very intrigued by the title of your book. Just having what we've heard about Father Roman, like I said, I had a chance to hear you speak about him at the Orthodox Women Healing Ministries conference, and you talked about him, the journey to simplicity. And I'd love to know more about why you chose that title and what we've learned about simplicity from Father Roman.
Well, it's an interesting, maybe an intentionally paradoxical title in a sense, because Father Roman was certainly no simple man. He was very complex, and he had a life filled with all sorts of, a fuller life perhaps than anyone might really want. He certainly didn't ask for a lot of the things that happened to him, but he accepted, and he lived with each event. His life was almost split in half in equal parts. First half of his life was in Romania in a very turbulent period of its history, and then the second half was in exile in the West as a missionary. And the overarching challenge, I think, of his life that he resolved in a very interesting and compelling way was the example that he was sort of born into in a small village that was associated with a monastic community in Bessarabia, which is now the Republic of Moldova, where he grew up as a child, basically in a rural agrarian setting. His parents were, I think he was proud of the fact that they were never that they didn't come from a serf background, but they were nonetheless very much peasant stock, farmers, and he had older siblings who had embraced monasticism. So he had examples of that. But he, being the youngest of 7 children, he and his next eldest sibling, who later, her name was Versavia, would later become Mother Benedicta. They were playmates. They were separated in age from the older sibs because their father had served in the Russian Imperial Army, had been a prisoner of war for a period of time, early in the 20th century. But, and he had to work in Chisinau during the week frequently, and so the kids saw their father primarily on the weekend. And so the major spiritual influence in their lives early on was their mother, who later became a nun after she was widowed, and the monks from the local monastery. And Father Roman, as a little boy, remembered there were certain things that really stuck with him about his experience. Even in the long church services, his mother emphasized, these are the, when he would kind of wiggle and squirm a bit, but she said, you must be still, because this is what we offer back to God. And then on one occasion, when they were, I think, coming up for communion, he got away from his mother and ran right through the royal doors, past the priest, as about a toddler. And she was aghast, horrified, and the priest monk, smiled at her and said, "Don't worry, he's going to become a priest someday." So there was this sense of discernment amongst these simple monks. So he held them in awe, and then he eventually transitioned for his education after going through elementary school to what are called religious high schools, or in Romania, they're seminaries, and what we would call a theological seminary here is a theological faculty at a university. And he went through both those levels of training. at a very turbulent time in Romania's history, as the right-wing kind of fascist movements were coming to full flower by 1940. Romania was isolated from the West and either really had to align either with Nazi Germany in the World War II or with the Soviet Union. And the leader Antonescu, Marshal Antonescu, of course, made his alliance with Germany. And so they were caught in this difficult period. In the midst of all of this, pivotal experience that he had, though, was his encounter with a charismatic figure who had been a outspoken poet, literary figure, journalist, named Sandu Tudor. That was his pen name. And Alexandru Teodorescu, or Sandu Tudor, had actually gone from being a cynic and a skeptic on his own journey to Mount Athos to a profound conversion experience. And he wanted to bring the sense of continuous prayer, the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, that kind of continual prayer into a dialogue with the intelligentsia, if you will, of Bucharest, of Romania. And this began in 1943 in a movement that was centered in Antim Monastery, which is a men's monastery in central Bucharest, where the now monk Agathon, the novice, had himself housed, and on Sunday afternoons they would bring in intellectuals, clergy, even Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, the Lutheran convert from Judaism, attended some of these, according to Father Roman's later notes and letters. So it was a very interesting, profound time. They also encountered a monk priest from Russia who had survived the Soviet Gulag. He'd been freed by Romanian troops, Father Ivan Kuligin, who ended up being kind of the spiritual father for the group because he had been fully ensconced in the prayer and in this type of prayer life. But unfortunately, he later was arrested and sent back to the Soviet. Probably died in the Gulag again in Siberia. So there was this incredible ferment of intellectual activity, which was in tension with this experience of just the simple faith of the monks who prayed, which he experienced at the seminary at Cernica Monastery, which is outside Bucharest, in his early youth. And then in the university life, he had to negotiate being trained as a soldier. Thankfully, the war ended before he was actually deployed, but he was bright and did well in his training and was commissioned a second lieutenant. Something that he felt, even just the training with the military hardware, he felt traumatized by, and in his own kind of, because he's a very sensitive, peaceful person who would never want to harm anyone. And then a fateful day came with some of his friends. The communist government that was fully implemented by the Soviets, by their puppets in Romania, occurred in 1948. So they had to get rid of any kind of democratic forms by that time. And Great and Holy Saturday occurred that year on May 1. And of course, you know, May 1 is May Day. It's the great workers' holiday. Mm-hmm. And so the young Roman Braga, who was now teaching, he'd finished his theological training as well as a degree in Romanian language and culture, and he was now in his first year of graduate studies toward a PhD in theology, working with such people as Father Staniloy on Orthodox spirituality. Anyway, he and a number of his colleagues were involved in underground newspaper writing, And they published a manifesto, and then were handing it out publicly, encouraging people on the streets to not go to the May Day celebrations, but to honor Great and Holy Saturday. This is Holy Week. You can't do this as Orthodox Christians. And the vast majority of people, of course, in Bucharest and in Romania at that time and to this day are Orthodox. And so this is what was the initial pretext for his arrest. And then he went through a horrible experiment in an effort to create a communist personality through torture, using Pavlovian types of techniques that the Soviets had developed, but not to their fullest extent. Romania ended up being probably the test ground to see how they could use this kind of incredibly cruel method of basically taking one set of prisoners, torturing them into submission, and then turning them into the torturers of their colleagues. Wow. And this is what happened. And then later, in his first imprisonment from 1948 to 53, he was sent to the Canal, the infamous Canal Project. There is now a Danube Canal, by the way, which was completed by Ceausescu many, many years later in the 1980s. But the canal at this time was a Stalin, an attempt to appease Stalin, and a Stalin-style kind of 5-year project. But the Georgi Dej and Anna Pauker, who were the primary leaders, communist leaders and dictators at the time in Romania, called it affectionately the graveyard of the bourgeoisie. It was clearly an attempt to kill thousands of people, which they successfully did by forced labor under horrific conditions. So this is what he went from, this attempt to create a communist personality through torture, to this harsh labor camp. And then he was released, barely alive, but eventually made his way to Iași in the north of Romania, and was ordained. He came to the conclusion that he wanted to be a monk. He wasn't sure before that time whether he would marry or not, but he had an extraordinary dream, which he also said, don't trust dreams. But this one he kind of responded to because it was a dream from his mother, where he felt that it was clearly a confirmation that he was called to a monastic life, and he was tonsured a monk and ordained a deacon. And so between his 2 periods of arrest, he served as a deacon at the cathedral in Iași, but was under constant surveillance. And then the same burning bush movement was eventually turned on its head by the communist authorities. They turned it into a pretext to basically shut down the monasteries of Romania, arrest major intelligentsia figures within and outside the church in 1958, including Father Roman, and Rugel Oprins, the Romanian words for burning bush, also could be translated burning at the stake. And so they, in the mock trial they had, they actually cited, they said, you're using these figures from the 4th century, these theologians, as your inspiration to burn down the state. So St. Basil the Great was apparently a counter-revolutionary, according to the communist prosecutors, which, was the patent absurdity of it was apparent to Father Staniloy, who was tried with this group, and Sandu Tudor basically told him, of course they know it's absurd, but this is what, they've got to go through the show. And so it was in the experience of the prisons where the Father Roman became convinced that it's not an issue of theoretical knowledge. So much of our experience as Christians in the West is based on the mind, on what we learn, what we think. But he said it has to be an experiential one. And so many of his fellow prisoners were either driven insane or they became saints. And he said the only way he could eventually deal with many months of either torture combined with solitary confinement was to go inside himself. And this is where he encountered what he called the inner universe, where he could find, in fact, St. Isaac of Syria talks about this too, of going down within oneself and finding the entire kingdom of heaven. And this is what his journey was. So there's a sense of simplicity in unity, not simplicity as a lack of complexity, but simplicity in unity.
This is so interesting, Dan, because this does remind me of what a lot of people are struggling with right now after the last couple of years of a tumultuous situation that we've been in on a number of different levels. A lot of people are hurting, and it's nothing like Father Roman went through, of course, but gosh, what we can learn from him is community, and when we can, but when we can't be in community, that going into the inner life, the inner universe, being surrounded by the saints and Christ and the Theotokos can be life-giving and life-saving, I think.
And we had a little bit of that experience just in the whole process of writing the book. Mother Gabriella had approached Dan and asked him to be the author of the book a bit before COVID. But when we experienced the isolation period of COVID, it was sort of a perfect time to just hunker down at home and immerse ourselves in some of the historical records and some of the translated Romanian records. Even the secret police records, the Securitate, became available to us in translation to use. So just an amazing number of resources almost kind of miraculously started appearing that we were able to start sort of be sorting through and learning about him, but also kind of experiencing with him and learning some of what he had learned. It was quite an amazing blessing to experience that. So that was our COVID.
It's a better COVID than some people have had, for sure. You were really blessed and comforted. So for our audience, I know that you've, over the years, garnered so much wisdom from Father Roman. Is there any way that you can narrow down to say 3 things that they can take away from this interview?
Well, maybe one of the things to emphasize is that he, I think, modeled for us the fact that he loved everyone, that he even continued to pray in the prayers before, in the preparation of the gifts before liturgy. He included even his torturers in his prayers, that they were included in the communion prayers, which is just an incredible thing to think about. I think I would like to emphasize also that he really encouraged us to be continually aware of the presence of God, but he didn't insist on some elaborate technique. In fact, he thought that might be kind of dangerous unless you were under the supervision, maybe of a close supervision in a monastic community. For example, to use the breathing techniques and so forth that are associated with the Jesus prayer, at least in some of the traditional descriptions of it. Rather, he would emphasize including God in every activity that you have during the day, so that, if you're going on a walk, he would say, well, Lord, I'm taking a walk now, come with me. And so there was a sense of childlike trust in God and in his presence. In fact, he once said that monks are children with beards. I mean, and he really was. So this very complex intellectual man was at the same time very childlike. So there was that aspect of complete trust in God and a continual awareness of God's presence is what I think he taught us as maybe the best way to think of continuous prayer. And of course, the name Jesus is of infinite power and glory. The other thing is he always, and this, I think this is sad because of our experience in Romania, and a lot of the traditional Orthodox countries, they rarely commune. And he was adamant, no, you must not separate yourself from communion with God. Commune as often as you can. And he simplified all of the prayers before communion as this simple statement: Lord, I'm not worthy to approach you, and yet I cannot live without you.
Mm.
And then,
yeah, that is beautiful. I know. I'm like, wow, I want to remember that because that's so true. I think that's true of all of us, but I need to remember that too. I never feel worthy.
It's still what we say when we go up for communion. And
I mean, the other prayers are beautiful, the long prayers, that are in the prayer book. But this, I think, is his summation of those things. And then I think, in witnessing his physical decline, what I was so struck by was that he didn't become. I mean, he obviously had increasing physical limitations. He eventually, at one point, near the end of his life, could no longer get out of bed. And this was somebody that I remember helping to get out of bed because he was very disciplined to say his midnight office and to witness this and realize how undisciplined my life had been. But when he finally could no longer get out of bed, he would say, "Well, Lord, I guess my legs are no longer necessary," or and he would accept that. And when he could no longer read those more complex prayers of the church, he would just cross himself and say the Jesus prayer, eventually going back into the silence of God at the very end.
Yeah, that's definitely something to learn, that in any circumstance in our life, to do as much as we can do, but not try to do more than we can do, and know that he still accepts our offering and our prayers. And yeah,
he seemed to have such a sense of patient endurance.
Yeah, he did. Well, Dan and Jane, thank you so much for being on the Filled with Flesh show with us today and for sharing your relationship with Father Roman with us. And I believe you said the book is coming out in October?
God willing.
Yeah.
God willing.
Supply chain issues have affected the ability to, get publishing quality papers. So we hope though SVS Press is certainly working very diligently on the project, which we appreciate.
Good. Well, I'm going to run right out and get it as soon as it's available. Well, thanks again, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I love that Dan and Jane came on because my memories of Father Roman are so sweet and dear to me, even though I didn't really know him that well. I didn't know him really at all. But I remember the first time I went to Holy Door Mission Monastery, I wasn't even a catechumen at the time. And I was still in that Protestant mindset of, why do we cross ourselves? What? I don't get it. Is it a superstition? I don't get it.
Yeah.
So I'm in liturgy, and I'm pretty sure I was the only person there not crossing myself. And Father Roman gave his sermon, and then when the sermon it seemed over, then he went into this whole teaching on why we cross ourselves.
Oh my goodness.
And at the time I was just sort of stunned. I didn't know if he just noticed that I wasn't, or if he just felt the Holy Spirit move him to talk about this. But I tell you what, he convinced me that crossing ourselves is a gift from the church. He brought in something about kids on a school bus. I can't even remember exactly what he said, but I've been crossing myself ever since. He's really made an impact on my life, even though we didn't know each other personally. Just watching him walk across the grounds there, I could see it was like peace walking across the grounds.
How incredible that kind of peace, how contagious it is, and continues. Just hearing about him, how it floods you with peace.
Yeah.
And what a gift if we could just work on a fraction of that kind of piece, what kind of an impact that we could make in our communities or in a world that is kind of hurting right now.
Exactly. And hopefully that's what we'll get from this wonderful book coming out in, God willing, October. Okay, with that, let's get on to our Healthy Body segment. We're going to be talking about flexibility. Petar Arsenyjevic is the founder of Triforce Training. He believes that nutrition and exercise are the fundamental part of health and achieving personal excellence. Petar holds a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Valparaiso University. He's a personal trainer and a nutrition coach specializing in corrective exercise, sports performance, and weight loss. He trains in person and also has a robust online practice training clients remotely. His website is triforce.fitness. Hello, Petar. Thank you for coming on our show. I really appreciate it.
Hello, Cynthia. Thank you for inviting me to your Filled with Less show. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so glad you are, and I would actually love to have you on several times. You're so knowledgeable about so many things, but today we're talking about flexibility. So first, why don't we talk about what we mean by flexibility?
Okay, so there are many definitions to flexibility, depending at which scope of practice we're looking at. I'm going to define flexibility according to National Academy of Sports Medicine. Their definition of flexibility is, they define flexibility as normal extensibility of all soft tissues that allow for optimal range of motion of a joint. So it's the ability to move well and freely within your normal range of motion.
Okay, so why do we need to pay attention to this? Like, why is this so important? What are the ramifications if we don't pay attention to it?
So I'm going to go a little bit first into describing how flexibility works, and then I'll kind of jump into telling you why this is so important. But to answer that question right off the bat, it is important because as we're getting older, our bodies are constantly getting tighter. So let's kind of dive deeper into that mechanism of what is actually going on, and why do we need to practice flexibility daily. So with my clients, generally, I use integrated flexibility, which is performed to correct muscle imbalances, increase joint range of motion, decrease muscle soreness, and relieve joint stress, improving muscle extensibility, and maintain the functional length of all muscles. These factors increase neuromuscular efficiency and enhance overall function. So, how does this work? The body is filled with mechanoreceptors. These are the receptors that are sensitive to stretches, pressure, and the two main ones that we look when we talk about flexibility are muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs. Now, muscle spindles are sensitive to change in the length of a muscle. So picture extending a leg, for example, and the leg stops and it cannot extend anymore. The muscle spindles are sending a signal for the joint to kind of stop moving. It's kind of noticing that pressure. Now, Golgi tendon organs are the ones that are sensitive to change in tension of that muscle. So when the body is under tension from that stretch, after about 20 to 60 seconds, Golgi tendon organs override the signal of muscle spindles, allowing you to stretch further. So that is how flexibility is, how actually the function behind the flexibility. Now, it is important to practice it because, as I mentioned earlier, we're constantly getting tighter, and our bodies, from sitting, we're getting movement dysfunctions. Even if we're intensely training or doing some sort of an activity, repetitive, we're going to cause those muscles to be overactive, and the ones that pull our body into the correct position are going to be underactive and slowly going to lead the joint out of place, which can cause pain, discomfort, and just overall dysfunction and problems. And that may or may not radiate to that joint specifically. So, for instance, a foot and ankle dysfunction can lead to low back pain, and vice versa.
I like that. And
Sorry, I give quite a bit of information there.
Yeah, that's quite a bit of information. But you know what? I like the way you train people, because I know when I come in and I say that, excuse me, that I have some pain or some tightness, you typically look at where a muscle needs to be built or where flexibility needs to be increased, right? And then we attack the pain that way.
And that is correct. So we always start with an assessment, and assessment tells us a lot about what movement compensations we have and how we can correct them. Actually, oftentimes when we correct these movement compensations, a lot of these problems and pains go away just by bringing back the body to its normal, natural alignment. And if, we always fall into unalignments. Let's just say if we're sitting at work, like we are right now and talking, and our shoulders are moving forward, our necks are a little bit leaning forward. We're constantly getting tighter, and we have to do something to reverse that effect. Otherwise, we're going to be pulled out of alignment.
So I think something that you said earlier really resonated with me when you said as we get older, our muscles get tighter, our tendons get tighter. Mm-hmm. We start losing flexibility. When I was in high school, it was sort of my claim to fame on dance team that I was so flexible. So the way I had to stretch out in order to do my high kicks and flying splits and all the stuff I used to be able to do, people were like, oh my gosh, look at how flexible she is, yada, yada. I really would like to get back, not that much, but to some sort of flexibility like that at 60 years old. Is that even possible?
So to it also depends at what age are we talking about, because as we age and we mature, for instance, the structure and the angle of our joints, so if we can picture the leg joint and the femoral head of the leg, that angle changes and it actually decreases, which does not allow you to have as much range of motion as you did in your earlier years. There are simple assessments we can do that to kind of figure out whether the joint allows us to move into that range of motion, whether it's muscle or joint, whether it's related to tight muscles or decreased range of motion in the joint. A great example would be, you just mentioned, for instance, splits. If you are able to, for instance, position one leg up on a chair to be in that perfect 90-degree angle, and then if you're able to do the exact same thing with the other leg and get the 90-degree angle, there's no reason why you cannot do middle splits on the floor. The only reason is that the muscles are getting tight because of not being trained properly. And training adults and training young individuals, the methodologies are a little bit different. Adults need to focus a little bit more. Basically, to break it down, it's a lot easier to stretch a body that is not as tight. So different methodologies have to be used with adults, and those generally involve a little bit of training with weights as well, because weights are able to kind of utilize gravity to push you down into some of these positions, so that way you can acquire more range of motion. Okay. But absolutely, you can improve your range of motion quite a bit. And everybody's background and history is different. If somebody had a car accident or some sort of an injury that has lots of scar tissue form, that's going to affect, how much they can stretch. But there's a lot you can do to improve. But yeah, especially, with adults.
Okay, well, very good. Well, we're going to have to add to my goal sheet that I want to be able to do the splits in like 6 months.
Oh, absolutely. And I do remember we did test that at one point, and you did have the prerequisites to do it. It's just now building up the strength to do that. Because the body tends to tighten and tense up if it senses a lack of strength. For instance, in the adductor muscles, those are the muscles that are on the inside of your legs. So the body instinctively just tightens up to protect you. And we slowly have to build up that strength so that we can achieve it safely. And an easy methodology to do this is just practicing squats a little bit wider each time.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, thank you. That leads me into my last question. So for our audience, what are your favorite practical methods and tips and strategies for people who want to increase their flexibility?
So I generally, there's 3 kinds of flexibility that we can talk about right now. There are more than that, but without making this into an hour-long session, we're just going to talk about the 3 primary ones that I teach according to National Academy of Sports. The first one is called corrective flexibility, and this is the flexibility that's focused on improving the joint's range of motion and bringing you back into the proper alignment. So we use two different techniques for this. We use static or self-myofascial release, which is foam rolling, or applying a pressure to the muscle until the tension releases. And the other one is static stretching. Now, for some clients that are a little bit more past that point, once there have been corrections that have been made, then we go into active stretching. Active stretching or active flexibility is being able to, for instance, kick and hold your leg up for 2 to 5 seconds in that position. And that will stretch the antagonist muscles. So agonist, if you picture, for instance, raising your leg, the hip flexors are responsible, in addition to other muscles as well, are responsible for raising the leg, but also the hamstrings are now stretching. And finally, the one that I deem relatively very important that it's not practiced enough is dynamic flexibility. Dynamic flexibility are movements like kicks, like, for instance, running, squatting, all of these necessary movements that are responsible for healthy joint motion and, promoting synovial fluid built up within the joints and lubricating the joints so everything flows smoothly.
I love that, and so much of this can be done at home, right? I mean,
oh, absolutely,
on your own.
And that's the best. This should become kind of like a daily routine, kind of like brushing teeth. It's self-maintenance that you do it, and then you have the benefits from doing it.
Yeah.
Of not feeling tight, of not having some pains, and we can't always avoid pains, but we can definitely reduce our chances of getting hurt by making sure that our joints are functioning at their optimal.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to say. By paying attention to this, like you said earlier, we can avoid pain, and we can avoid what we can control about pain, and we can avoid injury down the road as we get older.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
those
Peter,
are some of the. Oh, sorry. Those are some of my favorite techniques that I like to utilize with myself and with my clients that produce really great results.
Yeah. So I want to throw you a curveball. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question. Hopefully you won't be especially hard on me next week in retaliation. But as an Orthodox Christian, what does physical fitness mean to you? Why?
So, this is a great question. So, okay, we all have our mission in life, the mission that God sends us to do. I was, prior to becoming a personal trainer, I was going to medical school. So I saw certain things that, were not right for me to do, and that I was not capable of doing, or to be able to help clients in the way that was the best way I could utilize my time to help them. For me, helping people, helping them know today, and this, with God, there's you dedicate your life to God, and that's what it means to me. But that's not fitness. Fitness is something else. Fitness is tied into the struggles we have facing us today in the society. For instance, more than ever are we now having problems, dysfunctions, for instance, from sitting in a car, from staying, working over, long hours, or from being in these positions that were never to us, but we were never exposed. Even if we go back into talking about the shoes that we're wearing today, that during those times people did not have issues. So we are addressing some problems that are generally created by society, that we live in today, to meet. As far as that's what it means for me, this is how I can help people live a more fulfilling life. But as far as how it relates to becoming, to inspiring our faith, I believe Saint Paul mentioned something, and you did catch me a little bit off guard.
I'm
He
sorry,
did mention
Peter.
something that we should practice movement. It could be St. Peter or St. Paul. I believe it was St. Paul later down the line. That it's not the essence, but it should be practiced, because the better you move, everything's a little bit easier. But this is, for instance, how I can help people. And this is my mission from God that I feel like.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything you do, Peter. Thank you for being such a great trainer to me and being so knowledgeable that I could bring you on the show and help other people. And I'm so glad that you have an online practice so that you can help people remotely. And I hope you have a wonderful day. God bless, and thank you for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. on your show. I really had, it was very enjoyable for me. And hopefully I was able to share some useful information for everyone out there listening. And thank you very much for listening, for everybody that's listening. And, it's a blessing to be here with you on the Fill It With Less show. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
He's such a nice guy.
Yeah, he really is. He's motivating.
He is motivating. I really enjoy working out with him. A lot of the audience may know my past trainer, Luke, because I featured a lot of his exercises in My Beautiful Lent and My Beautiful Advent. I switched over to Petar, and I'm really enjoying him because I think Luke was great, but he sort of had me doing the same type of thing every time. Petar, when I walk in the door, he says, okay, what's going on today? Do you have any pain? Do you have any tightness? What do you want to work on? We've done everything from pain management to correcting my posture. He's just so good at tailoring what he does with you to what your needs are, and that's one of the first, I think, hallmarks of a good trainer. Have you ever used a trainer?
I haven't. I just recently upped to actually going to a class.
Okay.
Because I realized I was extra, and it was a slow progression because I started walking, then I started doing a little bit of weights, and then realizing I don't really push myself quite as hard when it's just me.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm in a Pilates class, and just having that little bit of instruction and those other people in there to push you, it does make you push yourself a little further.
Yes.
But for those same reasons, as I age, I want that flexibility, I want the strength, I want to avoid injury.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of injury, a lot of the exercises that he has me do, and this is another advantage of a trainer, if you can get one, is if I were to do the same exercises at home, I wouldn't be able to tell that I'm using the wrong form,
right,
and could easily hurt myself.
Mm-hmm.
Where Petar's constantly saying, put your arms back here, do this, a little bit different, and it makes all the difference in the world as far as isolating your muscles and not causing injury. And I think that if people can, hiring a trainer even for a short period of time to kind of teach you that good form so that you can protect yourself is a good idea, or going to class like you do, because I'm sure your instructor comes around and does some correction. That's so important. And then just the motivating factor. Like you said, he pushes me more than I would push myself. And I know that I have to be there at Thursday at 4:30. And if I was left to my own devices on Thursdays at 4:30, I would not be working out.
Right, fine. That's worth it right there. Just because someone's waiting for you and you have to show up.
Exactly.
It's good motivation.
Exactly. Well, hopefully we can have Petar on again. One of the advantages, too, is he's Serbian Orthodox. So we have the most incredible conversations about our faith while we're working out, and it's a lot of fun. So we'll bring him on again. We'll talk about some other topics in the future. But with that, why don't we get to how to say no? Let's go to the productive life.
So today's community question is, how do I know when to say no?
That's such a good question, Molly, and I know it's something that you and I have struggled with in the past, and that we've gotten a lot of help on actually through Deacon Michael Hyatt.
Yes.
But I know that you live your life in a way that sets you up to make good decisions on this. So can you tell everyone what you do?
Yes, and like you said, this is something I've learned somewhat recently, because in the past I've really struggled with this as a people pleaser. I do not like to disappoint people, but the problem is I don't want to disappoint them when they ask, so I say yes, but then end up disappointing them later when it's either not in my gifts, or I'm not doing it consistently, or can't give it all the attention it deserves. So I've had to relearn how to put up boundaries kind of in this area. And the way I do it now is, first of all, I really had to learn how to disengage from the internet, from my phone. And the reason why is because I realize when I am addicted to a phone, and it's different from my desktop, but the phone, it's something where you're constantly grabbing. If you're curious, you're looking something up, and I'm realizing it is fragmenting my thoughts. It's limiting my ability to stay on task, to think things through, to think clearly, and to really go inward and find the stillness and the silence I need to make good decisions.
Right.
So that's the first thing I've had to start doing is keep it in another room. You know, it's on. I can hear it if I ring, but not right next to me, so that I have more silent, open space to think. And then the second thing that I do is make a personal mission statement. Okay, and this is something I learned from you, that a lot of stress in our lives comes from, you know, we have our highest values and priorities, or, you know, things that mean the most to us, and yet how we're actually spending our time and energy, there's a gap there, like a chasm between the two, and that's causing the stress. And I want those things to be cohesive. I want how I spend my time and energy to align with my highest values and priorities. So for me, right now, I kind of wrote it down for this, my personal mission statement is to prioritize the health of my mind, soul, and body, foster strong connections with my family, be an active member of my parish community, and invest my time and talents into our Filled with Less ministry. Okay, so those are my top things.
It's beautiful.
And what you can actually do then, once you write that down, print it out, tape it to your planner, put it over your computer, and this is what you're going to refer back to as opportunities come up. Does this reflect my mission statement, or does it detract?
So when someone's
from it?
asking you, Molly, can you do this? You do a mental checklist.
Right.
Is it falling within my priorities, or is it outside of my priorities?
Or is it outside of my priorities? And then the other thing you have to do is, like you said, get your planner.
Yes.
So you assign your non-negotiables. Okay, so like for me, in order to foster those things in my mission statement, from 5:30 to 6:30 a.m., that is my time for prayer and contemplation. That's when I journal. That's when I have silence. That's when I read spiritual books. That is a non-negotiable. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9:30 now, I have Pilates. That's on my calendar, non-negotiable. I make note of weekly church services. Those go onto my planner because that's part of my mission statement. That's part of my priorities. One thing I wanted to add on, I realized, is like, I miss my mom. I haven't spent time with my mom. And so I thought, like, I want to be intentional and see if I can do weekly tea time with my mom. So that's something I want to purposefully add.
Oh, I want to go to tea with you guys.
You're welcome. You can come to tea time with my mom.
I want to spend time with your mom, too.
I know, she's the best. And then I have all of my Filled with Less meetings, calls, projects, okay? So now those things are like anchored in my planner, and that's off limits, you know?
Right.
So when I have an opportunity or commitment, I first of all see, well, what space is available, you know, and will this commitment or opportunity, is it something right now that, again, is going to promote, my specific values at this time?
Exactly. And this is so opposite from how so many people live their lives and their time management or lack thereof. Someone asks you out of the blue, can you do this? And your brain is just a jumble. You don't know what you're doing in the future. Right. You're just living by the seat of your pants, taking each day by day. Do I say yes? Do I say no? I don't know. It's also confusing and stressful, where Molly's way is so wonderful because she can just go to her planner, think logically. First of all, do I have any space open? If that is blank on the calendar and she has space open, then she says, okay, does this align with my mission statement? Then an easy yes or no comes out of that. Yeah. I think the second thing that people have a hard time doing is saying no in a way that isn't uncomfortable.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Because, again, if you are a people pleaser like me, it is really difficult to say no sometimes.
It is. And this is really a key thing that I did learn from Deacon Michael Hyatt and his whole organization through his Best Year Ever program and coaching. And in fact, I was the recipient. It was so funny because he taught us how to say no in a way that makes somebody else feel good that you said no. And one time I sent an email to ask him on my podcast. And I got an email back, and I know it was from his assistant, but it was like he totally walks the talk.
Yeah.
Like the assistant sent me an email where it was like, no, Michael doesn't have time to be on your podcast, but he made me feel good about it.
Yeah.
So here's the key. It's a yes, no, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all, the first yes is saying yes to yourself and saying it's okay to say no. It's okay that I don't have time. It's okay that I'm not superwoman, superman. It's okay that this doesn't fall within my priorities and my mission statement. So it's okay. So you're affirming yourself. Mm-hmm. The other yes is affirming that person. I'm so glad that you asked me to do this. Thank you for thinking of me. Thank you for putting your trust in me, depending on the situation. So it's affirming yourself and affirming the person. That's the yes. Then the no can just be as simple as 2 letters. Mm-hmm. No. I'm sorry I won't be able to do that. So often people think that they need to give this big explanation.
A lot of oversharing.
Yeah, oversharing. It's like, and really, honestly, the person who's hearing the no, in a way they don't really care. They just want to know, is it a yes or no? Are you
available or not
available or not available?
Yeah.
So all of the, I can't because of this and because of that and yada, 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 and I'm so busy and stressed and yada, it's really not needed. No is a complete sentence, as they say. And then the last one is another yes. And that's where you close it out by maybe offering another solution for them. If it's via text or email, you can then say, well, I can't do this, but you know what? I did a podcast on this. Or I wrote a blog on this, if you happen to be a podcaster or a blogger. Or I read this great article or this great book, if they're asking for like knowledge help.
Yeah.
Or something that gives them another solution that maybe they hadn't thought of. So yes, no, yes. So you want to run through this as an example?
Okay, let's practice it.
Okay. Hi, Molly.
Well, hello, Cynthia.
And let's say this, let's say that this is like text or email.
Okay.
So this is on paper. Okay. Hey, Molly, I'm going out of town next week for a couple days. Would you come to Valparaiso? I know it's 30 minutes away, but would you be able to come because my neighbors are on vacation and get my mail for me, pick up my mail for me?
Okay. So, Cynthia, thank you for thinking of me. I am glad that, you thought of me, that you reached out to me. Would I say unfortunately?
Yeah, you can say unfortunately. Okay. You can regret it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, I can't do that right now. But did you know that you could get your mail held at the post office? Here's a link to do that if that's something that might be helpful. I've done it before. Just an option.
Wonderful.
Would that work?
Yes, it would. And have a great trip. And, because, and then I walk away with, oh my gosh, I forgot. Yeah, that's right. It's so easy to go online and hold your mail for a day or two.
Yeah.
Or for however long. So she just gave me a great option. Okay, now let's say that it's in person.
Okay.
Molly.
Okay.
So I'm approaching you as you're picking your kids up from school.
Okay.
Out of the clear blue.
Okay.
You're not ready for this. Okay. Hey, Molly. In March, we're taking the kids on a field trip to the Field Museum in Chicago. And after careful deliberation of all the parents, we've selected a couple that we know.
My weak spot.
That we know are responsible and dependable, and we thought of you immediately. Would you be willing to spend the day in Chicago with us? So we'd get on the bus at 7 a.m. You'd be home in time to make dinner for your family, but you'd be gone all day. Can you join us on March 24th?
Okay. Oh my goodness. Thank you again. I'm honored that you thought of me. That sounds amazing. Let me check my planner, which I have with me, for that day, and now I'm going to see on my planner what I have, which may be filled with less call, maybe Pilates that day, and something else, and be like, oh, you know what? I have appointments that day. I'm so sorry, but do think of me in the future.
Yes, that's nice. You left it open.
Yes, because, but I think the key thing is having done the work of filling out your planner, right?
Exactly.
It's when you don't have things written down that you end up saying yes, and then you look later and now you're shoving things in there haphazardly, and that's where that stress comes in. So it's during the pre-work of getting those non-negotiables down, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And there's just one more thing that I want to close out with, because I think what happens to a lot of us is it comes out of the blue.
Yes, and then we're taken off guard.
Yeah, and you don't have your planner with you maybe. Maybe
Okay.
it wasn't in your car.
Okay.
Maybe you didn't have it in your purse. It's okay to say, you know what, let me look at my schedule and think about this, and I'll get back to you.
I'll get back to
It's
you. That's a good
perfectly
one.
okay to
Yes.
not feel put on the spot like I have to answer right now.
Yes.
The perfect answer is, you know what, I'll get back to you on that.
Yep.
And that's okay.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that helped everyone for figuring out when to say no. If you have any questions around what we're talking about, feel free to email us and ask us some specific questions or a specific issue you had that you think might have been a little more complicated, and we're happy to help you with that. Well, we're nearing the end of our show, but we have some exciting announcements to make. First of all, 6 Weeks to Sanity is going live again on Monday, February 21st. So you have time to jump in. This is primarily for people who have joined us in the past. They're past participants. They wanted to be able to go through it again in community because they do have lifetime access to the course. But we're also letting new people jump in. So if you have friends or family or people in your parish and you want to go through 6 Weeks of Sanity with us, we promise you it will help make your life more peaceful, more organized, less stressful, and give you a community of wonderful people to do this with. So we're excited about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then, of course, there's our membership. And as y'all know, this is a membership-supported ministry. Our members mean the world to us. We really, really encourage you to join us. This month, the deep dive was on creating more energy in our lives, beating fatigue. And we have a live session coming up. You still have time to jump into that. You didn't even have to do the deep dive. Just come for the camaraderie and the learning. And that's coming up in a couple weeks. So you can go on the Filled with Less website and see the date and the link to get into that.
Excellent.
And then also, something that we've decided for the membership going forward are a couple different things. First of all, we've done probably, 18 months of deep dives or more than that.
At least, I think more than that.
We're going to start revisiting them. So this allows the people who weren't able to do the deep dive that month to do it in community with the whole group. It allows new people who have jumped in since that deep dive to experience it. And it serves as a report card of progress for those who did do the deep dive. Maybe it was a year and a half ago. And now you can kind of see, oh, goodness, this is where I'm at. This is what I learned. This is what I implemented. So it's going to be great for everybody, I think.
Yeah, and Julie's done an amazing job in our membership hub.
Yeah, she has.
Of kind of freshening it up and making it more organized, and it's looking really good.
It's looking good.
Yeah.
Easier to get around.
Yes. Then we also have our book club,
Yes.
of course, coming up. And this month we are reading The Next Right Thing, speaking about decision making, by Emily Freeman. And we're going to be discussing her book on February 24th at 6 p.m. Central. So you can go to our website and register for our book club there.
Yes, we're having such a good time in our book club. We're having great
really
discussions and a lot of fun. So that wraps up the show. We are going to be heading to Washington State in a
very
couple
soon.
of weeks.
Yeah.
Yes, to speak at a church in the Tacoma area. And this is so fun as more and more churches are opening up and having retreats again. And with my hat on as director of the Orthodox Speakers Bureau, I can tell you that so many speakers are getting booked now for Lent and for the entire year. It's just so refreshing. And when Molly and I have been out speaking in December and now again this month, can't you just feel like the joy of people being in community together?
Yeah.
So we're so excited. If any of you want us to come speak at your church, we are happy to do that. Just reach out to us and get all the particulars, and we look forward to meeting you. So with that, that's the end of our February show. We'll see you in March.